The first time Ernst Mueller saw an American combine harvester, his hands trembled so badly he had to clench them into fists. The machine towered 3 times the height of a man, its steel teeth glinting in the Iowa sunlight as it devoured row after row of golden wheat. Ernst had been a farmer before the war, working his family's plot outside Dresden with horses and hand scythes, his back bent low under the German sun. Now, as a prisoner of war standing in the vast American field, he watched one man operating this mechanical beast accomplish in minutes what would take 20 German farmhands a full day. A peculiar emptiness opened in his chest, not hunger, though that had been his constant companion through the North African campaign, but the hollow recognition that everything he had been told about American weakness was a lie. The guards didn't need to explain the machine's purpose. Its efficiency spoke a language that transcended words. What troubled Ernst most was not the machine itself, but what it represented. A nation so abundant that even in wartime, its fields overflown with grain harvested by steel giants, while his homeland's farmers still stooped with scythes and sickles. "How," he whispered to a fellow prisoner, "do we fight against this?" The evening wind carried his words away, but the question lingered long after the machine fell silent. That night in the barracks, Ernst ran calloused fingers over the small notebook he'd kept hidden in his boot through capture and transport. How could he possibly describe this mechanical monster to his father back home? What words could convey the enormity of what he had witnessed? Not just the machine, but the devastating truth it represented about two worlds colliding in ways no battlefield could reveal. As the Iowa summer stars appeared through the barracks window, Ernst wondered if anyone back home would believe him, or if they too would need to see American farming with their own eyes to understand the true nature of the war they were losing. It had begun months earlier, on a sweltering transport ship crossing the Atlantic. The German soldiers, captured in the North African campaign, huddled below decks, still stunned by their defeat. Among them, Ernst Mueller, 26 years old, son of a Saxon farmer, now a prisoner of the Americans. The whispers in the cramped quarters carried tales of execution squads, of starvation camps where defeated Germans would be worked to death in coal mines or factories. After all, wasn't this how prisoners were treated in the Reich? Ernst's company commander had assured them all that surrender meant certain death, that Americans would show no mercy to the master race. Many had chosen suicide over capture. But Ernst and thousands of others now found themselves alive, shackled not by chains, but by uncertainty. The ship docked at Newport News, Virginia, in early June 1943. As the prisoners emerged, blinking into the harsh sunlight, they braced themselves for rifle butts and attack dogs. Instead, they encountered military police, who maintained a professional distance, neither threatening nor friendly. Red Cross workers distributed water in paper cups, actual drinking cups, not tin bowls. This first contradiction lingered in Ernst's mind as they boarded trains heading west. Through the windows, the prisoners glimpsed American towns untouched by bombing, farms with intact barns, roads without craters. Captain Werner Hoffman, an officer from Ernst's regiment, muttered darkly, "It's a facade. They're showing us their best to break our spirit." Others nodded in agreement, but doubt had already taken root. The trains carried them deep into the American heartland, to states many had never heard of, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, where sprawling camps awaited behind barbed wire. Camp Algona in northern Iowa became Ernst's new home, a collection of wooden barracks surrounded by watchtowers and endless cornfields. The first night, each prisoner received a wool blanket, a real mattress filled with cotton batting, and a pillow. Ernst ran his fingers over the fabric, confused by this unexpected comfort. In Afrika Korps bunkers, he had slept on bare ground, considering himself lucky when he found enough sand to soften the stones beneath him. The next morning brought another shock. Breakfast served on actual plates. The portions were generous: eggs, bread, even coffee with real sugar. Not the weak ersatz brew made from roasted barley that Germans had grown accustomed to, but actual coffee that filled the mess hall with an aroma that triggered memories of pre-war Sunday mornings.
Captain Hoffman advised caution, warning that the food might be drugged or poisoned. Some men hesitated, but hunger overcame suspicion. Ernst took his first bite and felt a wave of confusion wash over him. The eggs were fresh, the bread soft and white, luxuries that had vanished from German tables years ago. "This is how they feed prisoners?" whispered Franz Keller, a tank mechanic from Hamburg who sat beside Ernst. "My family in Germany hasn't tasted eggs in 2 years." The guards overheard, but simply shrugged. To them, this was standard fare, nothing special. This casual abundance delivered the first real blow to the prisoner's worldview, more powerful than capture itself. If America could feed its enemies this well, what did that reveal about its capacity to arm and supply its soldiers? The question remained unspoken, but hung in the air as the men finished their meals in thoughtful silence. What other assumptions about their enemy might prove equally false?
The order came 3 days later. 50 prisoners were needed for agricultural work at nearby farms. The camp commander explained through translators that local farmers faced severe labor shortages with so many young men overseas. The prisoners would work under guard, earning scrip for small luxuries from the camp canteen. Ernst volunteered immediately. After weeks at sea and days on trains, the prospect of open fields called to him like water to parched earth. He had grown up following his father behind a plow. Perhaps farm work would provide some sense of normalcy in a world turned upside down. The trucks delivered them to a farm owned by the Anderson family. 500 acres of corn and wheat that stretched to the horizon in neat geometric rows. To Ernst's Saxon eyes, accustomed to small plots divided by hedgerows and ancient boundaries, the scale alone was disorienting. But it was the machinery that stopped him cold. Tractors 3 times the size of anything he'd seen in Germany.
Mechanical planters that sowed 6 rows simultaneously. Harvesters that cut, threshed, and sorted grain in a single pass. One machine, one operator, doing the work of dozens. Harold Anderson, the farmer who greeted them, was a man in his 50s with weathered hands and a quiet demeanor. Through a translator, he explained each machine's purpose with the patient pride of a craftsman. The John Deere tractor could plow 20 acres a day. The combine harvester could process 5 acres an hour. The mechanical corn picker eliminated the need for the back-breaking labor of hand harvesting. Ernst translated for the others, his voice growing tighter with each description. In Germany, propaganda had painted Americans as soft urbanites, incapable of the discipline and hard work that characterized the German peasantry. Hitler himself had praised the German farmer as the backbone of the Reich, the keeper of racial purity and traditional values.
Yet here stood evidence that American farmers had embraced technology that made them vastly more productive with far less physical toil. Carl Schmidt, a former blacksmith from Bavaria, ran his hand along the steel frame of a corn picker. "My village has 1 tractor for 6 farms," he said quietly, "and it's always breaking down, no parts." Anderson seemed to understand without translation. He patted the machine and nodded. "Got this one in 39. Haven't missed a day's work since. Factory in Malines sends parts overnight if I need them." The translator conveyed this casually, but Ernst felt the words like physical blows. In Germany, farmers were lucky to get repairs within months. Factories produced tanks and bombs, not replacement parts for farm equipment. Even before the war, metal had been rationed, with farmers urged to make do and mend. Here, replacement parts arrived overnight, as if by magic. "Ask him," Ernst said to the translator, "how many men it would take to harvest his wheat without the combine." Anderson considered this, then held up both hands, fingers spread wide. 20 men, 2 weeks. He gestured to the combine. 1 man, 2 days. The prisoners exchanged glances, the implications sinking in. This was not just about farming. It was about capacity, about a nation with such industrial might that it could mass-produce these complex machines while simultaneously building the bombers that darkened German skies.
Ernst thought of the propaganda films showing American soldiers as undisciplined and soft. What advantage did physical toughness offer against the leverage of technology that multiplied a man's labor 20-fold? That evening, as the sun set over the endless fields, Mrs. Anderson appeared with a metal wagon loaded with sandwiches, pie, and pitchers of cold lemonade. The prisoners hesitated, then accepted the food with murmured thanks. Ernst bit into the sandwich, fresh bread, thick slices of ham, cheese so sharp it made his eyes water. Farm families in Germany were eating rutabagas and thin potato soup, saving every scrap of real food for the troops. Here, farm wives casually prepared feasts for enemy prisoners. "She makes this for field workers every day," the translator explained as Mrs. Anderson distributed seconds. "Says it's tradition." Ernst translated for the others, watching their expressions shift from suspicion to wonder to a complex emotion that had no name, a mixture of gratitude and despair. This casual generosity represented another kind of power, one that no military training had prepared them to resist. How did you maintain hatred for an enemy who fed you ham sandwiches and apple pie after a day's work? The machine that truly shattered Ernst's worldview arrived a week later. He and 20 other prisoners had been assigned to the Williams farm 10 miles from Camp Algona. As their truck approached, Ernst spotted something he had never seen before, an irrigation system with metal pipes extending across the fields like silver veins, spraying precise arcs of water over the crops. In drought-prone Saxony, farmers prayed for rain or laboriously carried water in buckets when heaven failed to provide. Here, water flowed at the turn of a valve, transforming dry soil into fertile ground with mathematical precision. "Automated irrigation," explained Frank Williams, the farmer, through the translator, "saves 300 man-hours a week compared to hand watering." Ernst translated mechanically, his mind struggling to calculate the implications. 300 hours of labor eliminated by pipes and pumps? How many divisions would it take to match that advantage? How many heroic sacrifices and iron crosses could counterbalance such cold efficiency? But the irrigation system was merely a prelude.
After lunch, Williams led them to a large barn where a strange contraption sat waiting. It resembled a small factory on wheels, a corn picker combined with a sheller that not only harvested the crop, but removed the kernels from the cob in a single operation. "Brand new," Williams said proudly. "First one in the county. Gonna revolutionize corn harvesting." The prisoners gathered around the machine, their expressions a mixture of awe and dismay. Lieutenant Dieter Wagner, an engineer from Dusseldorf, examined the mechanism with professional interest. "The design is ingenious," he said quietly in German. "Look at the sorting system, completely automated. We have nothing like this, not even in our factories." Ernst nodded, remembering harvest time in Saxony, the entire village gathering to pick corn by hand, the painful blisters, the weeks of labor. This machine would do it all in days, with a single operator. Williams started the engine, and the machine roared to life, its various components moving in coordinated harmony. He drove it a short distance into the cornfield, and the prisoners watched as it devoured a row of corn, spitting clean kernels into a collection bin while expelling the stripped cobs and husks. "One man, 70 acres a day," Williams shouted over the engine noise. "Used to take 30 men with hand pickers." The translator relayed this, but Ernst barely heard him. He was watching Lieutenant Wagner's face, seeing in it the same realization that had been growing in his own mind. This was not merely about farming efficiency. This was about two fundamentally different approaches to production. One relying on human labor and traditional methods, the other leveraging technology to multiply human capacity exponentially. Captain Klaus Berger arrived at Camp Algona in late August 1943, transferred from a temporary holding facility in Virginia. As the ranking officer among the new arrivals, he quickly established his authority, gathering intelligence from prisoners who had been working on local farms. Ernst watched the captain's face darken as he absorbed descriptions of mechanical harvesters, automated irrigation, and grain elevators that could store a village's worth of wheat. "This is American propaganda," Berger declared to a group gathered in the barracks. "They are showing you these things deliberately to demoralize you, to make you doubt the Reich." Werner Hoffmann, who had once warned of American facades, shook his head. "With respect, Captain, these aren't displays. These are working farms. The machines are not prototypes or special models. They're everyday tools here." "I've seen the maintenance sheds," added Lieutenant Wagner. "Parts and repair manuals dated years before the war. These aren't new developments. This is how they've been farming for a decade or more." Berger's expression hardened.
"And you believe this makes their system superior? Have you forgotten everything? The decadence, the racial mixing, the chaos of their democracy?" Ernst, normally quiet in the presence of officers, found himself speaking. "Superior or not, Captain, their methods produce results. One farm I worked on harvests more corn in a week than my entire village does in a month, with a quarter of the labor." "And at what cost to the soul?" Berger countered. "Man becomes a servant to the machine. This is precisely what the Führer warned against. Technology without spirit, efficiency without higher purpose." The debate continued into the night, revealing a growing divide among the prisoners. Some, particularly older officers like Berger, clung to Reich ideology, interpreting everything through its lens. Others, especially those with technical backgrounds or farming experience, found their certainties crumbling in the face of empirical evidence.
Ernst belonged to the latter group, though he kept his deepest doubts private, writing in his notebook only when alone. In early October 1943, as the first frost silvered the Iowa cornfields, the camp administration announced a new phase of the agricultural education program. Small groups of prisoners would visit an experimental farm run by Iowa State College, where the latest innovations in farming technology were being developed and tested. Ernst and 11 others were selected for the first visit, accompanied by guards and translators. The experimental farm sprawled across 300 acres just outside Ames. As their truck approached, Ernst noticed fields divided into precise test plots, each with different varieties of corn or different cultivation methods. A cluster of modern buildings housed laboratories and workshops, where agricultural scientists developed new techniques, crop varieties, and machinery. Dr. Howard Mitchell, an agricultural engineer, greeted them at the main building. "Welcome to the future of farming, gentlemen," he said through the translator. "What you'll see today represents the cutting edge of agricultural research, much of which will be standard practice within 5 years. He led them first to a laboratory, where soil samples were being analyzed. Technicians in white coats measured precise quantities of minerals and nutrients, testing how different combinations affected plant growth. "We've mapped the soil composition of every acre on this farm," Mitchell explained. "This allows us to customize fertilizer applications for maximum yield with minimum waste." Ernst translated for those who didn't understand the interpreter, watching their reactions. For men raised in a tradition where farming knowledge was passed down through generations and soil was treated almost mystically, this scientific approach seemed almost sacrilegious.
"You treat the soil like a chemistry experiment," observed Sergeant Hans Weber, a vineyard owner from the Rhine Valley. Mitchell nodded. "Essentially, yes. Plants need specific nutrients in specific quantities. By understanding those needs precisely, we can increase yields by 30 to 40% over traditional methods." During a lunch break, the prisoners sat at picnic tables outside the main building, eating sandwiches provided by the research station's cafeteria. The mood was subdued, each man processing what he had seen in his own way. "This isn't farming anymore," Hans Weber said quietly. "It's industrial production that happens to involve plants." Schmidt the blacksmith nodded. "Yes, but look at the results. Their approach feeds more people with less labor." "At what cost to the soul?" Weber countered, unconsciously echoing Captain Berger's earlier question. "Farming should connect man to the land, to the rhythms of nature."
"This turns farmers into factory workers." Ernst listened, turning a pencil between his fingers. "My father would agree with you, Hans. He believes farming is about tradition,
about preserving the ways of our ancestors. He paused. But I keep thinking about the children in our village. How thin they've grown these past few years. How hollow their faces looked the last time I was home on leave. A heavy silence fell over the table. Whatever their ideological positions, all of them had witnessed the growing food shortages in Germany, the increasing desperation in rural areas as more and more young men were conscripted, leaving fields untended or worked by exhausted women and children. As the winter of 1943 settled over Iowa, blanketing the camp in snow and limiting farm work, the agricultural education program shifted indoors. The camp administration converted a storage building into a classroom where regular lectures and workshops continued through the cold months. Ernst found himself deeply involved, his farming background and quick mind making him valuable as both student and occasional translator when technical terms confused the regular interpreters. One December morning, Dr. Mitchell returned to the camp accompanied by representatives from John Deere, the farm equipment manufacturer. They brought scale models of various machines, technical diagrams, and even a functional miniature tractor that demonstrated key mechanical principles. This tractor design incorporates lessons learned from 5 previous generations, explained Robert Hansen, a John Deere engineer. Each iteration improved fuel efficiency, reduced maintenance requirements, and increased pulling power. During a break, Ernst found himself standing beside Hansen at the model display, examining the miniature tractor's transmission. "You seem to understand these principles well," Hansen remarked. Ernst nodded. "I studied some engineering before the war, though I returned to farming to help my father." "And what do you think of our designs?" Ernst hesitated, then decided on honesty. "They're impressive, far more advanced than anything available to German farmers." He paused. "Though I wonder if simpler versions might be developed, machines that could be produced more cheaply, with fewer specialized parts." Hansen looked interested. "For use in Germany after the war, you mean?" "Yes, our manufacturing capacity will be limited, but the need for mechanization will be great." Hansen considered this, then pulled a blank sheet of paper from his briefcase. "Show me what you're thinking." For the next 15 minutes, Ernst sketched a simplified tractor design, explaining his reasoning as he worked. "Without hydraulics, you could use this mechanical linkage system, less efficient but simpler to manufacture and repair. The engine could be smaller, trading some power for fuel economy." Hansen nodded approvingly. "Clever adaptations. You're thinking like an engineer, identifying the core functions and finding ways to deliver them with available resources." Ernst smiled ruefully. "Necessity teaches such thinking. In Africa, we learned to keep vehicles running with whatever parts we could salvage." "War drives innovation," Hansen agreed. "Many of our advances in farm equipment came from applying lessons from military vehicle design." He studied Ernst's sketch again. "Would you mind if I took this? Our company is already thinking about post-war markets in Europe. Simplified designs like this could be valuable." Ernst hesitated only briefly before nodding. Was this collaboration with the enemy? Or was it simply a farmer thinking about feeding people after the guns fell silent? The line had become increasingly blurred. That evening, Captain Berger called a meeting of all German officers in the camp.
His face was grim as he addressed them. "It has come to my attention that some prisoners are actively collaborating with the Americans, providing technical knowledge that could benefit their war effort or post-war economic interests." His gaze swept the room, lingering on Ernst and several others known to be active in the agricultural program. "I remind you that as German soldiers, your duty remains to the Reich, regardless of your current circumstances. Sharing expertise with the enemy constitutes a form of treason." Lieutenant Wagner stood. "With respect, Captain, the agricultural knowledge being shared has no military application. It concerns food production, which will benefit German civilians after the war." "You presume Germany will lose," Berger said coldly. "I presume Germany will need to feed its people regardless of the outcome," Wagner replied. The spring of 1944 brought renewal to Iowa's farmland and a surge of activity at Camp Algona. As fields thawed and planting season approached, the demand for prisoner labor increased.
Ernst and others with agricultural training found themselves working regularly on local farms, applying both traditional skills and the new mechanical knowledge they had acquired. During this period, Ernst was assigned to the Peterson farm, where he operated a newly delivered tractor with a mechanical planter attachment. The machine could prepare soil, plant corn, and apply fertilizer in a single pass, work that would have required teams of men and horses over several days in Saxony. Ben Peterson, the farmer, walked beside the tractor on the first morning, showing Ernst the controls. "She's brand new," he said proudly through the translator. "First one in the county with the hydraulic lift system." Ernst nodded, already comfortable with the machine's operation after his training at the John Deere facility. "I can handle it," he assured Peterson in his improving English.
Very good design. As the day progressed, Ernst worked methodically across the vast field, the mechanical planter leaving perfectly spaced rows in its wake. By lunchtime, he had accomplished what would have taken his father's entire farm crew a week. The efficiency was no longer shocking to him. He had come to expect it, but the implications still resonated. This single machine, operated by one man, was outproducing entire German villages. At noon, Peterson's wife brought lunch to the field: sandwiches, apples, and a thermos of coffee. She spread a blanket on the grass at the field's edge, gesturing for Ernst to join them. This casual sharing of a meal with an enemy soldier had once seemed strange, but now felt almost normal. Another example of the practical American approach that separated the individual from the conflict. As they ate, Peterson asked through the translator about farming in Germany.
Ernst described his family's operation: 40 acres of mixed crops, worked primarily with horses and hand tools. Peterson shook his head in disbelief. 40 acres is a garden here, he said. How can a family survive on so little land? Ernst had no answer that made sense in American terms. How could he explain generations of subsistence farming, the carefully maintained traditions, the pride and methods unchanged for centuries? The question lingered as they returned to work, the tractor's engine drowning out further conversation, but not the thoughts that troubled Ernst's mind. By the summer of 1944, news of Allied advances in Europe reached the camp through approved newspapers and radio broadcasts. With these reports came an increasing awareness among the prisoners that Germany's defeat was likely inevitable.
Captain Berger and his ideological allies attempted to dismiss such news as propaganda, but the evidence of American industrial capacity that the prisoners had witnessed firsthand made the war's outcome seem increasingly certain. In this context, Ernst and others focused more intensely on learning skills and techniques that might help rebuild Germany after the war. The camp administration, perhaps recognizing this shift, expanded the agricultural education program, bringing in specialists to teach about soil conservation, crop rotation, and livestock management. For many prisoners, these lessons represented not just practical knowledge, but hope, a way to imagine a future beyond defeat and destruction. In July 1944, a representative from International Harvester visited the camp, bringing plans for a simplified harvester designed specifically for post-war European reconstruction.
The machine could be manufactured with minimal specialized components and operated with less powerful tractors than American models required. "We're developing these with European recovery in mind," explained Martin Collins, the company representative. "They won't match our domestic models in efficiency, but they'll be affordable and repairable with limited resources." Ernst studied the plans with intense interest. The design reflected many of the simplifications he had suggested in his conversations with Hansen months earlier. Collins confirmed that European feedback, including input from prisoners in the agricultural program, had influenced the company's approach to post-war markets. "Your practical knowledge of European farming conditions has been invaluable," Collins told the prisoners. "You're helping shape how we'll assist in rebuilding after the war." For Ernst, this represented a profound shift in how he viewed his captivity. What had begun as a humiliating defeat had transformed into an unexpected opportunity, a chance to absorb knowledge that might help heal his homeland when peace finally came. This perspective was not universal among the prisoners. Berger and his allies viewed such collaboration as betrayal, but it sustained many through the uncertainty of captivity. As 1944 waned and 1945 began, the reality of Germany's impending defeat became increasingly difficult to deny. News of the Allied advance across France, the bombing of German cities, and the collapse of the Eastern Front filtered into the camp. Even Captain Berger grew quieter, his ideological pronouncements less frequent and less confident. In this atmosphere of approaching transition, Ernst was summoned to the camp commander's office one February morning. There he found not only the commander, but also Robert Hansen from John Deere and a representative from the International Red Cross.
"Mr. Mueller," the commander began, "these gentlemen have a proposition for you and several others with agricultural expertise." Hansen explained that John Deere and several other American agricultural companies were establishing a formal program for German prisoners with farming backgrounds. Those who volunteered would receive comprehensive training in modern agricultural methods, with the explicit understanding that they would apply this knowledge to rebuilding German agriculture after the war. The program would continue after repatriation, the Red Cross representative added, with sponsorship for visits to American manufacturing facilities and experimental farms once travel becomes possible again. Ernst listened with growing amazement. "You're planning for German reconstruction even before the war ends?" Hansen nodded. "Hunger knows no nationality, Mr. Mueller."
A stable, well-fed Europe is in everyone's interest, regardless of who wins battles. The choice was presented not as a political decision, but as a humanitarian one, an opportunity to help rebuild regardless of the war's outcome. For Ernst, whose thoughts had increasingly focused on his village's future, the decision was clear. He volunteered immediately, as did Wagner, Schmidt, and 17 others when they were subsequently approached. Captain Berger called it collaboration with the enemy. Ernst called it planning for survival. The divide between these perspectives represented not just different political views, but fundamentally different understandings of patriotism. One defined by loyalty to a regime, the other by concern for the welfare of the German people, regardless of who governed them. In April 1945, as news of Germany's collapse accelerated, the Advanced Agricultural Program for selected prisoners intensified.
Ernst and the others received specialized training on simplified versions of American farm equipment, seed selection for depleted soils, and land reclamation techniques. Engineers from various American manufacturers provided detailed technical manuals specifically adapted for European conditions, materials that would become invaluable in the reconstruction effort. The program culminated in a remarkable gesture. Each participant would be allowed to bring back specific technical knowledge and, eventually, actual equipment to Germany. The companies, looking toward post-war markets, viewed this as both humanitarian aid and long-term business development. The prisoners saw it as a lifeline for their devastated homeland. On May 8, 1945, the news of Germany's unconditional surrender reached Camp Algona. The reaction among prisoners varied from despair to relief, from denial to grim acceptance. For Ernst and those involved in the agricultural program, the moment marked not an ending, but a transition, the beginning of the reconstruction work they had been preparing for. 2 months later, as repatriation plans began taking shape, Ernst met with Hansen one final time. The John Deere engineer brought a package containing complete plans for the simplified tractor Ernst had helped design, a machine specifically adapted for European post-war conditions. "We're calling it the Model E for Europe," Hansen said. "Your input was invaluable in its development. We expect to begin shipping them to Germany and other European countries as soon as transportation allows." Ernst accepted the package with mixed emotions. "I never expected this when I was captured. To be helping design tractors with an American company?" Hansen smiled. "War makes strange connections, Mueller. But rebuilding, that's something we can all understand." In August 1945, Ernst Mueller and hundreds of other prisoners began their journey back to Germany. He carried with him not just memories of American abundance, but specific technical knowledge, detailed plans, and formal connections with American manufacturers committed to European agricultural reconstruction.
What had begun with the shocking sight of a combine harvester had evolved into something neither he nor his captors could have imagined, a bridge between enemies, built not of politics or ideology, but of the practical knowledge of how to feed hungry people. Ernst returned to a devastated Saxony in the fall of 1945. His family's farm had survived relatively intact, though years of neglect had left the fields in poor condition. His father, now stooped and gray, greeted him with tears and questions about his captivity. When Ernst began describing the American machines he had operated, his father shook his head in disbelief. "Fairy tales," the old man said. "No machine can do the work of 20 men." Rather than argue, Ernst opened his precious notebook, showing diagrams of tractors, harvesters, and irrigation systems he had carefully documented. "This isn't the future, Father. It's the present, and it's coming here, whether we choose it or not." In the spring of 1946, Ernst received a letter from Robert Hansen. John Deere was establishing a small assembly operation in Frankfurt, producing the simplified Model E he had helped design. Former prisoners with technical training were being hired as instructors to teach German farmers how to operate and maintain the machines. Would Ernst be interested in such a position? 6 months later, Ernst stood in a makeshift classroom in Frankfurt, facing 24 German farmers from across the Western occupation zones. Behind him stood a gleaming Model E tractor, simpler than its American cousins, but revolutionary by German standards. "This machine can plow 15 acres in a day," he told them, with one operator. The farmers looked skeptical, just as he had once been. One older man, his face weathered by decades in the fields, raised a calloused hand. "My family has farmed with horses for 300 years, he said. "Why should we change now?" Ernst recognized his father's words, his own former beliefs in the question. He gestured to the tractor. "Because your children are hungry," he said simply, "and this will feed them better than horses ever could." By 1950, thousands of American-designed tractors and implements were operating across Western Germany, many assembled in European factories using simplified designs developed with input from former prisoners like Ernst. The agricultural revolution that had so shocked him as a prisoner had come to his homeland, transforming not just farming practices, but rural society itself. Ernst Müller never returned to his family's small farm. Instead, he built a career teaching modern agricultural methods, first with John Deere and later at an agricultural college near Dresden. The notebook he had kept during his captivity, filled with diagrams of machines that had once seemed like science fiction, became a teaching tool for generations of German farmers. Decades later, long after tractors and harvesters had become commonplace across Europe, Ernst was interviewed for a documentary about the post-war reconstruction. The interviewer asked what had surprised him most about America during his captivity. Ernst thought for a moment, then answered with a story about the first time he had seen a combine harvester in an Iowa field. "It wasn't the machine itself that shocked me, though it was impressive," he said. "It was what it represented, a different way of thinking about problems, about the relationship between people and work. They showed us not just better tools," he continued, "but a better question. Why struggle when you can innovate?" That lesson rebuilt not just our agriculture, but Europe itself. The machines that had once symbolized American power and German defeat had, in the end, become bridges between enemies. Physical manifestations of a shared human concern more fundamental than any conflict: how to better feed a hungry world. And perhaps that, more than any peace treaty or political alliance, represented the true end of the war and the beginning of a different kind of future.